Okay. I think this is working. Yeah, so I think they've changed the system since the last time I did this. Maybe because they've shifted away from like classic upload studio thingy majig as a whole. It seems like they've rejigged the live stream aspect too. So yeah, I had to sort of do a little bit of tinkering, sort of getting myself familiar with uh, all the new bells and whistles, I guess, even though they're probably not all that new. They are to me because it's like the second time we've done this. I don't know. Anyway, whether or not you're watching via the live stream or you're watching this afterwards, hello everybody. It is me. Let me do this. I'm going to shift my camera away from the window because that is a very glaring light. Although you are also getting quite a bit of glare on the picture in the back there. You can't see from here, but the picture that you're getting the glare from is a sort of Renaissance portrait of our cat. It's a very classy picture. Yeah. It's also really silly, but if you can't be silly, then it's a bit of a shame. So, yeah, at some point I will actually maybe show a picture of the picture, so you can actually see what it looks like. But yeah, I'm gonna try and tilt my way over here. Also, just like a equipment box. I really did not prepare for this whatsoever, but why break the habit of a lifetime? I should preface before we get any further that there is the risk of some outside noise because if you watched the last video where I recorded in the cupboard in the wardrobe, um, yeah, I had to because there's been so much construction noise outside lately that it's just not even been funny. So at the minute, it's all good. There was a guy breaking something about 20 minutes ago, and that was like the most we've had for a little bit today. So hopefully it stays off. But if not, uh, there's not much I can do about that. But yeah, I just thought I would give you forewarning. This may not be up to the usual standards of quietness, as it were. But hopefully it will be, or thereabouts. So yeah, it is the end of April. Um, Tomorrow it's gonna be May. Yeah, I'm sure we're all sick of that joke now, but still, yeah, end of April, start of May. What weird April it's been. What a very strange, weird April it's been. Just what a weird, strange world we're living in at the minute. Very scary, very confusing, very topsy turvy. But hopefully everyone is doing all right. Hopefully everyone is just sort of making it through as best they can, taking it day by day, doing the best you can to stay healthy, stay happy, stay sane. Which at this point uh, in the timeline is something that is hopefully very much happening for all of you. Yeah, frustrating times, confusing, but we do what we can, right? We're doing what we can. Um, but hopefully this is a little bit of a alleviation for you, a little bit of a break. Um, there's my wife going somewhere. She was watching some Disney Plus before. I think she was watching Tangled. I think that's what she said it was. Anyway, we're not here to talk about what she's been watching. We're here to just sort of talk about what I've been watching and what you guys have been watching and reading and listening to and enjoying. That is the main emphasis of the end of the month ramble. Just a very casual, if I can even get my words out, casual chit chat of sorts. Um, So yeah, let's have a look. Let's take a look at the notes that I've made, and by notes I mean I've just like strung a couple of keywords together. Um, okay, so where shall we start? Where should we start? Let's start with films. So I've primarily been watching through the filmography of Paul Thomas Anderson this month, um, starting from the very beginning with Hard Eight, which I think was 94. Oh, do you know what? I can't even remember now. It's like 90, no, 96. I think, anyway, it don't matter. Paul Thomas Anderson, for those of you who don't know, fantastic sort of contemporary American film director. Started some point in the 90s. I actually started in the 80s with a short film, like a short sort of mockumentary about Dirk Diggler, who is, of course, the central character in Boogie Nights, which was his second film. And yeah, I've just sort of been going through his discography, his filmography, through each film. I've still got two left. But yeah, I've gone through the first six, so Hard Eight, Boogie Nights, as I just mentioned, Magnolia, which I've seen a few times, mainly when I was at university. I remember it being a big film back then, even though it came out in 99. I know Magnolia came out in 99. I remember having the soundtrack in my car for the longest time. It was just like a weird discovery that I made. Like 2003, and seen it a few times, but watched it for the first time in, I want to say, like over 12 years. Yeah, not quite as good as I remember. Bit of a slog, bit of like a real drudge at points. Some really good performances and some really interesting characters, but yeah, just a bit of a bit of a trek. So Hard Eight, Boogie Nights, Magnolia, then Punch Drunk Love, then There Will Be Blood, and then The Master, which is where I'm up to. I've just finished The Master a couple of days ago. And I've got Inherent Vice to watch, which I've never seen before, and then I have Phantom Thread, which for me is his best film. Just just really, really complex and fascinating sort of romance story slash grim fairy tale interpretation. Yeah, just kind of dark, but also just really intricate with the sort of power struggle between the two main characters. But yeah, so in terms of films, just kind of been watching through some PTA stuff. I have watched some other things, the likes of which failed to jump to me. Onward on Disney Plus when that was released a little bit earlier in the month. We watched that, really like that. But then again, it's a Pixar movie, and you can never really go wrong with maybe the exception of, I don't know, Cars with Pixar. And we watched another animated thing called The Willoughbys, which I think is a Netflix studio film, which was actually surprisingly very good, very funny. Sort of weird, idiosyncratic sense of humor, a little bit Wes Anderson esque with a touch of Leica Studios in terms of the animation, a little bit not as grungy, not as tactile looking, not as homemade. Well, this is not. It sounds like a backhanded compliment to say like studio animation is homemade looking, but it kind of has almost a sort of very practical effects look to it, like claymation esque. Anyway, I'm sort of digging myself a hole, but yeah, it was pretty good. It's actually really, really pretty good. Other films, I actually don't think I've seen anything else other than the the 6 PTA films that I've mentioned and those 2 animations. Um, yeah, yeah, revisiting some of PTA films have been really good. I've never seen Hard Eight before. It was a pretty good, solid debut. Watching Boogie Nights again for the first time in God knows how long reminded me how good it is. In fact, watching it again a little bit later, I had a much more deeper appreciation for it. Just funnier, and just the tonal switch in that film is just very light-hearted and funny for the most part. But when it kind of switches to a more serious tone, man, it just like hits you in the kneecaps with a hammer. Um, there are certain sort of subplots in there which just take a pretty dark turn. But he's really good at that in terms of switching tone up, and it's something that you kind of see a little bit more in Magnolia, but not as well executed as Boogie Nights. Again, watching There Will Be Blood for the first time in God knows how long. Probably a couple of years after it was released, like 2009, maybe 2010 is the first and last time I saw There Will Be Blood. So yeah, going back into that film was really interesting, and obviously having developed a better understanding of cinematography and just cinema as a whole, can appreciate it on a much deeper level. Um, Also, just in terms of like character development as well with Daniel Day Lewis, and just whatever is going on with that guy in that film. Yeah, really good to rewatch that again. I just watched The Master for the first time last year. Tried to cram it in before the end of the decade to see if it would make like my top 25 films list. It didn't, but it still holds up as a really, really good film. Yeah. So yeah, as I said, I've got Inherent Vice still to watch, and I have got Phantom Thread to watch as well at some point. I've got just a few things to watch that I'm looking forward to. One of which is the Beastie Boys story, new documentary that just came out last week, directed by Spike Jonze, who I'm a big fan of, as well as being a fan of the Beasties. So curious to see what that's going to be like. Talking of documentaries, I think the last time I did this, I was still going through the story of film by Mark Cousins. I finished that this month, and that was just an absolute treat to watch and just really sink into the history of film from both a production and technical standpoint, but like a cultural standpoint, and like the social reflections that the mediums had over the years. Really interesting. There's a hardcover book that came out before the doc, so I am getting that as well at some point. So that'll be really interesting to dive into that and look at things from a slightly deeper perspective. But in terms of documentaries, I've just really been on like a big documentary kick this month. Just catching all sorts of little bits and pieces, but the one thing that is really sticking out to me, that I'm just absolutely loving right now, is not Tiger King. Oddly enough, I am one of, I think, a few people in the world, it seems, that have not watched Tiger King. I'll be honest, the story, it seems interesting. Seems like there's lots of twists and turns, but there just also seems to be a lot of just awful people in it. And I do like characters that you dislike. I do like phony characters and antagonists, but you know, people that just seem actively hateful, no thanks. Plus, the main thing keeping me away from watching it is I just, unless it's for conservation purposes, I hate the idea of just enclosing wild animals in confined spaces and just domesticating them. Like, I have zero interest in watching something about a man that thinks it's a good idea to just collect big cats. Like, nah, jog on, son. Not interested. But the documentary series that I have been interested in, that I'm getting round to eventually, is The Last Dance, which is being shown over here on ESPN. and is on UK Netflix, and looks at the 97-98 season for the Chicago Bulls, and looks at individual players from the team. The central focus is Michael Jordan because he was the central focus of the team and of the league and just the sport in general at that point. But it looks at Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, Phil Jackson, Chicago Bulls general manager Jerry Krause is a featured key player, and other players from the league and from years past. It's really, really fascinating. Even if you just have like a mild to non existent interest in basketball, it's still a fascinating story about a team who was at the height of their success, like an actual dynasty, and how it's falling to bits right at the peak of its power. Like a really interesting sort of descent of an empire. Just really well done, like really well executed in terms of folding time, dipping into the past and looking how certain players and certain people within the story got to where they were the 97-98 season and what events led to the success and the fall of that team. Just really interesting stuff. Again, whether you have an interest in the sport of basketball or not, just as a general story of a sort of empire that was successful and then began to face strain and stress and troubles and strife. It's just really, really fascinating. Um, and they're doing 2 episodes a week. There's been 4 released so far, another 6 to go. And I'm really looking forward to the next 2, but I just don't want it to end because it's, again, just really, a really fascinating story. Um, in terms of other stuff, TV wise, that I've been watching, I have fallen hard in love with a show called The Midnight Gospel, which is a series of conversations taken from Duncan Trussell's podcast, The Duncan Trussell Family Hour, over the years. And there's sort of interstitial scenes put together to sort of mesh them and make a bridge between points and make like a narrative out of these pre-existing conversations. And the conversations themselves are just wildly fascinating, very open, free thinking conversations on self potential, self healing, self progression, drug use, death, magic, meditation, self esteem, sense of identity. A lot of big, big, worldly, say, naive and universal topics, which are really expansive and really intricate at the same time, but it's just really intelligently broken down and analyzed and looked at from a variety of interesting perspectives and angles. And the plus side, if that wasn't enough, I mean, this is the thing, you're either going to love this show or you're going to hate it. And I can see why some people would hate it because it is pretty heavy and it's really weird. It's really out there, particularly because of the narrative frame that the show takes and the animations. So the gist of the narrative frame is that the show follows a guy called Clancy, who is a spacecaster with a malfunctioning multi-world simulator. And because it's malfunctioning, he can only visit dying planets. And he goes to different dying planets and finds somebody to interview. So he finds life on a dying planet and examines it from, as I said, a variety of different angles. But the animation's really weird, really trippy. But it's not just weird and trippy for the sake of it. There's a lot of sort of visual metaphors going on, a lot of visual representations of the topics talked about. Some of which, some of which are really kind of random, some of which are really quite the accurate sort of allegories for what's happening in the actual conversations. A lot of sort of really interesting visual reflections of the topics and themes that Clancy and his guests are talking about. I think it's co-created by Pendleton Ward, the guy that did Adventure Time. So if you enjoyed the sort of somewhat off kilter, eccentric stylings of Adventure Time, you may enjoy this, but it may also be a little bit too far off into the realm of abstract for you. I don't know. Again, it's one of those things I think you either find out within like the first episode if you're going to be uh, present for the rest of the journey or if you're just getting off at the first stop. And again, I understand why if it's the latter because it is so very strange and abstract and surreal, and it may just be too weird and trippy, too much of like a bizarre rambling acid trip for some people. But I love it. I think it's actually really kind of deep and profound at points, especially in the second half. There's an episode which Clancy goes to a prison planet and it looks at life repeating itself for somebody, trying to do the same thing, making the same mistakes, but with slight variations. And it's really pretty interesting and deep and sort of reflective of what we tend to do just as a whole, as human beings. You know, our sort of nature to repeat patterns and to gravitate and latch onto patterns because there's a sense of comfort, even if it leads to places of discomfort. It's interesting stuff. The last episode as well is like a real heartbreaker. But I'm not going to go into any more detail because I think I've either sold you on it or I've just totally swerved you away from it. Either way. Um, so yeah, I've been really enjoying that of late. We did start as well on Netflix last night. We started Afterlife, the second season, the Ricky Gervais dramedy. I don't really like using that word because I don't really think it's very what's the word I'm looking at? It doesn't really do justice to certain things because it doesn't have to be one or the other and it doesn't have to be a melting pot of the two. But it's the first season was really sweet and touching, and Gervais is really good at that. He's good at making funny things, but he's also good at just digging into the human core and looking at what makes us broken and what makes us sort of heal ourselves again and how other people can help with that. And Afterlife is a really good example of that. I was a huge fan of obviously The Office and I liked extras. I really loved Derek. I think Derek was like a really unsung gem from Ricky Gervais, but I think this is pretty good too. I think this is shaping up to be some of his better work. Period too, especially the first season, because it takes the subject, if you're unfamiliar with the show, of a guy who works at a small newspaper, but is dealing with the death of his wife and is just has basically given up and is just horrible and just says everything that comes to his mind, doesn't apply a filter, and is just kind of going through life with so much pain and hurt and trying to deal with it, but not trying to deal with life. So, yeah. But as it progresses, it shows him trying. And this is what this second season seems to be about, is him actually trying to make himself better, to try and get better. So, but we're trying to do it as just 2 episodes at a time because it can get pretty dense, to say the least. Um, so yeah, that's about it for TV stuff, really, and films. I have been playing more games. Again, in the last ramble, I did talk about playing more games and getting Game Pass, and trying some stuff that I've not played before. This month it's kind of been a mix of playing some stuff I have played and some stuff that I haven't. So the two main things that I've been playing are Half-Life 2, which I did finish well over a decade ago. It's been weird. It's been like a sort of almost nostalgic month going back to stuff that I've experienced, but not for the longest time. And I've been really enjoying that, even though the controls are actually pretty clunkier than I remember them being. It's been good to go back to it. A really interesting sort of world that is built in. The gravity gun, still one of the best weapons ever made in a game. So much fun. One thing that isn't fun though is the little riverboat that you have to go about in the early stages of the game. Hate that thing and hate the controls for it. But still, other than that, it's been a really enjoyable experience playing through Half-Life 2 again. The other game that I've been playing that has been on my sort of list to play for the longest time. For years, this thing has kind of had a background presence in the back of my head. Is a game called Deadly Premonition. And if you follow the Liberty Whispers account on Twitter, which if you don't, you should do, come say hi. I tend to be a little bit more active on there lately at the minute, which is fun. Get to interact with a lot of interesting and cool people. But I talked about Deadly Premonition a little bit on there not so long ago. Here it is. If you are unfamiliar with this, it is somewhat of a cult gem. It's basically Japanese studio's version of Twin Peaks, but if you can believe it, with even more added weirdness. You are a FBI agent, York Morgan, sent to a small, sort of piney, woodlandy town called Greenvale to investigate a young woman's murder. But you encounter so many strange things, and I don't even know where to start with the weirdness with this, from the little cherub children that guide you in some way to the weird night demons that you have to kill occasionally, which sort of bleed this weird purple ooze and just have these strange death rallies. I want to die. So strange, but so enjoyable, and partly because the game is kind of broken. I talked about the controls being clunky for Half-Life 2. The controls for this are terrible. It is so hard to move around. Combat is really awkward. The menu navigation system is weird. There's incidental music for just about everything. Anytime you press the pause button, you get a weird sort of dramatic sting of music. Anytime you have dialogue with a character in the game, the text rolls out letter by letter and makes like this sort of beeping noise, almost like a digital typewriter. This is just scratching the surface of the strange gameplay aspects. You have to constantly have a clean suit and shave, otherwise your pay gets docked by the FBI. You can, at some random points at any time in the game, stop doing the mission and just go fishing. It's kind of that's the thing, it's an open world sandbox game with limitations and weird details. So you get given a car by the sheriff, who is just one of many just odd characters I've encountered. I've only played about 2.5 hours of the game, but there's so many weird little details in it that are amazing and just terrible and brilliant all at once. You can see why this became a cult gem, because it is a broken game in a lot of ways, but it's also really ambitious. Somebody I know described this to me as being like, the way he phrased it was, if you just look at it like a PS2 game that is being extremely ambitious, you'll enjoy it. And it's pretty much a really apt way of describing it, because it's the level of detail with some things that is just unnecessary. So as I said, you get a car and you can drive it around the entirety of Greenvale at any time that you want. But you can also indicate. You can put on your indicators. I forget what they call it over here in the US. Your turn signal. You can put them on. You can do your window washers, your wipers, but it doesn't really do anything because you can change the view. You don't have to be in the car. Just odd little details that really don't add up to much. You can sleep in the most random places. Just so much weirdness going on with the game, but I love it. I would love to do a sort of let's play series with it. But the only issue with that is, and I could do it, but it just wouldn't be relaxing. So people that like relaxing gameplay videos would hate it because of all the incidental music and sort of noise stings, and also the horror element of it too. It's not exactly something you could sort of put on and go to sleep to, but still, it's fascinating. It's, as I say, it's kind of broken. It's kind of overly ambitious, and it kind of makes no sense whatsoever. But I'm really enjoying it. So yeah, Deadly Premonition. If you'd like to see some gameplay footage, if I've enticed you with the weirdness that is Deadly Premonition, let me know. I mean, chances are I'm probably going to do some at some point anyway, because I want to share it with the world. I want to share it with anybody that doesn't know about it. I feel like I need to. I think most people do, but I don't know. But yeah, I've been enjoying it. I'm trying not to burn through it. I'm trying to play it like a TV show and do like 45 minutes to an hour each time I play. So yeah, Half-Life 2, Deadly Premonition. Um, in terms of reading, I didn't read anything last month, and I am actually behind my target of doing one book a month. But I am in the midst of reading this, and if you saw my lo-fi challenge video, you'll have seen this. But you, because it didn't pick up anything that I was saying, you won't have heard me talk about it. But this is basically Kim Gordon from Sonic Youth. This is her memoir called Girl in a Band. I'm a big fan of Sonic Youth. I like Kim Gordon as a person. I think she's very straightforward, one of those sort of very much down to earth kind of people who doesn't really speak much unless she needs to, and when she does, it's like she doesn't waste words. She is just very straightforward, and I appreciate that about just a person's general being. But she just also seems like a very interesting woman too, and also just obviously you had sort of the riot girl movement of the early 90s. You had a lot of female musicians, a lot of girl bands, particularly in the sort of rock genre, as they say, the riot girl movement of that time period. But preceding that, in the mid 80s, during like the boom of sort of alt rock, and then obviously grunge, not that many, really, not that many prolific women. So to be a woman and a key player in a major band of that sort of genre in that time period and ilk, really interesting perspective. Haven't got there yet. In terms of the book, it starts talking about her divorce from Thurston Moore, obviously, of a founding member of Sonic Youth, and then it kind of goes into her childhood and her upbringing. So, not really got into any of the band stuff yet, but so far so good. But yeah, I want to kind of finish that up because I kind of am stalling a little bit with that. I keep meaning to read a little bit every day, but just haven't given myself the discipline to do that yet. So yeah, that's what I'm reading. I am, as I say, behind on my target. So I'm about, I don't know, a quarter of the way through the book, if that. So I'm like, what, 2.25 out of 4 for the year so far in terms of books. But yeah. Anyway, Kim Gordon, Girl in a Band. If you like Sonic Youth, I would highly recommend that. I'll just highly recommend it anyway, because I mean, she's a good writer as well. She's a pretty good artist too. A lot of side hustles for that woman. A lot of interesting side hustles and projects. I think she put out, I think it was last year, maybe the year before, she put out her first solo album, which is also pretty good. Anyway, yeah, so that's about it for terms of books. In terms of actual music, which I suppose is a good segue from Kim Gone Girl in a Band to music that I've been really liking this month, or music that's been sort of prolifically, I want to go as far as saying prolifically, that has been present, let's say that, and repeated. First is album Although she's calling it a mixtape, but I want to call it an album because it's over half an hour long, so it's not an EP. And consider it an album. Is What We Drew by a artist called Yaeji, who makes. How do you describe what Yaeji makes? So it's a mishmash of different genres like electronica, house, a sort of a touch of club rap because there's some guest vocalists. There's a couple of guest MCs on the album, guest MCs even, like a mix of different sort of electronic music styles, but very stripped down, very lo-fi. I think I saw someone describe it, and I kind of stole this when trying to tell someone else about Yaeji a while back. Was that she makes like dance music for introverts, like internet dance music for introverts, because it's scaled down and it's, as they say, it's lo-fi. But there's definitely a danceable edge to it. You can tell there's an essence of club culture right at its core, but it's not as full on and sort of brazen as like typical sort of dance music genres. Some really interesting stuff. It sounds like someone that is just experimenting and being playful with ideas and sounds and styles and sort of techniques. And she hasn't really quite found what she's doing yet, but the experimental stage and listening to some of the ideas is really interesting, and some good tunes on there throughout. Pretty solid first proper album. So yeah, that's called "What We Drew" by Yaeji. I think that's how you pronounce her name. Yaeji. Yaeji is probably, I don't know. I'm terrible with pronunciations, but it's pretty good. So if you like sort of electronic music, you like lo-fi stuff, you like just sort of experimental stuff, it's not a bad one to listen to. Second album that's been played quite a lot, especially in the last 2 weeks, is the new Laura Marling album called Song for Our Daughter. I am a huge fan of Laura Marling. Really like stuff. Consider some albums I love, some albums I really like, some albums I like, but there hasn't been an album she's put out where I've been disappointed or didn't like. She is, for anyone who is unfamiliar with the name, English singer-songwriter who started off kind of just doing typical singer-songwriter fare, like folky type stuff, but sort of then branched off into sort of more, I don't know, you want to add elements of maybe a touch of folk rock, maybe some Baroque stuff. With her last album, Semper Femina, I think it was called, she kind of sort of branched off into some jazz stuff. But this album is more akin to like her earlier stuff. It's more stripped down. It's more basic, just some core instruments: guitar, bass, drums, keys, strings, and her voice. And the compositions in this record are fantastic. Just the way tracks are laid out, the way vocal performances are put out over the top of the instrumentations are fantastic. The songwriting is great. The idea behind the album and the title track on the album is like a figurative perspective of writing music for a daughter that doesn't exist, but if she had one, the songs that she would write for them, based on her experience, based on other people's experiences that she's encountered. It's just really solid. Actually, no, that's downplaying it. It's just it's flipping great. It's a really great album. The third album I'm going to talk about is one you may have heard yourself. I don't know. It's certainly been doing the rounds and it's certainly been talked about with a lot of praise, and that is Fiona Apple's new album, Fetch the Bolt Cutters. Pitchfork, for those of you who follow or care. I used to read Pitchfork, but then I don't know what happened. I don't know if it took new ownership. I don't know if they had a staff rotation. I don't know. I don't know if they just stopped being consistently good, I guess, for lack of a better word. But they just, I don't know, they just went off a little bit, and they just started championing, you know, to me, mediocre or overhyped artists way too much, and they kind of lost their head up their own backside a little bit. So I stopped reading a long time ago, but Pitchfork gave this album, Fetch the Bulk, as a 10, the first 10 in a decade. I think the last album they gave a perfect 10 to was Kanye West for My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. So it's been a while, but Fiona's got the first 10 since then. And a lot of other people have weighed in, given it perfect scores, called it a modern day masterpiece, and just, hailed it as the second musical coming, as it were. I have listened to the album a number of times now. First listen through, I kind of liked some of the stuff, wasn't keen on other parts of it. Kind of thought, in my head, if I were to score it, I'd kind of given it like a 6.57. But I've gone back to it, and it's not sort of swaying to other people's opinions. It is literally from going back and listening to it a couple of times and actually listening to the songwriting and the craftsmanship. And it has grown on me. It's not a 10. It's, for me, definitely not a 10. It's not a modern day masterpiece. I still have issues with it. Still don't care for some of the clanky percussion, some of the off time signatures in some of the ideas that she throws in. The, the occasion when she sings like a dolphin at the end of the first track, I can leave that. But there's a lot of good stuff in there. In terms of songwriting, it is actually really, really good. Very sort of ferocious and just not willing to compromise, and I think that seems to be the theme of the album as a whole, is that she's been holding on to a lot of stuff. She seems to have dipped into her past, into other people's pasts, other people's experiences, and has just let rip. And it is, pretty ferocious and pretty wild and just very open and what is the word I'm looking for? Uncompromising in a lot of ways. And, even though sometimes that uncompromising attitude and behavior results in certain things I don't particularly care for musically, I have to give her credit where credit's due. She's just gone all out with this. And, as I said, most of it works, some of it doesn't, but you've got to respect the attitude, you've got to respect the direction in which she's going with the album. So yeah, it's grown on me, and the songwriting is something that's really grown on me. Actually, taking time to not only just listen to the musicality of it, but listening to her words and listening to her turn of phrase and uh, metaphors and double meanings, and just the way certain things actually have a really interesting and tightly wound thematic core. Yeah, it's better than I initially gave it credit for, but I don't think it's quite as good as everyone else seems to be. I'm kind of in the middle somewhere. So yeah, if I were to score it, I think I'm at about an 8. It's kind of bumped up quite a bit, but yeah, it's definitely worth a spin if you haven't. If you have, um, and you really like it, let me know. If you've listened to it and you really hate it, let me know, because I know some people that don't like the album at all. Some people that just cannot vibe with it. And again, I understand, because it is in not to compare it too much to Deadly Premonition, but it's um, or even Midnight Gospel, but it's one of those things that I think you either are on board with for the most part, or you're just not. And I can see it both ways to an extent. Um, yeah, anyway, that's about it. I have gone on for longer than I expected. I haven't got anything else in my notes. I don't know what else I'm going to be kind of sort of doing for the rest of the next month going on, apart from those two remaining PTA films, the rest of that book and Afterlife. season 2, but other than that, I don't know what else. So I'm open to suggestions. So if you guys have been really enjoying something this month, whether it be a TV show you've discovered, something you've gone back to, and wanted to revisit for some time and actually have done, or it's something that you've had on your shelf for the longest time, and now with the time that we have, you've finally decided to sort of break it open, kind of like I did with Story of Film. Let me know what it is. Let me know what you've been enjoying. Let me know what you've been reading, watching, and listening to, and what you would recommend. Um, Everything that I've mentioned, I would recommend. I think you kind of have a good gist of whether you would be interested in it or not, hopefully. And if that's the case, and you go check some of the stuff I mentioned out, let me know either in the comments below, or you, as I say, can find me over on Twitter at Lib Whispers, LIB Whispers. It's just a good place to go find me anyway. Just sort of hang out, say hey. And if you've got recommendations that you've personally enjoyed yourself, as I say, or based on what I've talked about, if you've something in mind where you're like, oh, hey, you like that, you might like this, just let me know, as I say, down in the comments or over at Twitter. Yeah, other than that, cheers to the end of April, and here's to a less turbulent, more peaceful May.